Hello and welcome to another very special episode of the Flagstaff County podcast. I'm Cary Castagna, Communications Coordinator for Flagstaff County. I am joined today by my boss, Flagstaff County Assistant CAO Brent Hoyland, who is retiring at the end of this month after 32 and a half years with Flagstaff County. Brent, you're too young to retire.
Thanks, Cary. Where did 32 and a half years go?
I don't know. It goes by in a blink of an eye, right?
Doesn't it?
You're listening to the official podcast of Flagstaff County. So, Brent, when did it all start?
Well, for me here at Flagstaff, it started January 2nd, 1990. But I actually got into the municipal game in 1988, and I was the Assistant Fieldman for the County of Camrose, and cut my teeth there for almost 2 years. And I don't know if I've ever told you the story about one of my first service board meetings with Camrose.
Oh, go ahead.
It was interesting because I think it was maybe a week or 2 weeks shortly after I started, and of course, unlike Flagstaff County, the County of Camrose, their service board is a committee of council. So what they do during the council meeting, they break and then they do the service board business. So I'm starting to learn about these service boards and what they do. And of course, I go in there and I'm introduced to everyone, and they start discussing issues and voting on issues. And because I thought I was a part of the service board too, I'm voting right along with these councilors. And out of the kindness of, at the time he was the district agriculturalist for, he was working out of Camrose, David Sam. And David was sitting beside me. And I think I was putting my hand up for maybe the third vote of the day. And Dave just gently said to me, says, "Brent, you're not allowed to vote." And I went, okay. So a little bit embarrassed. And, you know, it was nice because I'm glad that none of the counselors there berated me and saying, "What the heck are you doing? You're not allowed to vote." But just the kindness of Dave to let me know that you didn't do that. So that was my first true lesson in municipal government. That's been kind of my theme throughout my career, learning through doing. I guess that's the 4-H in me, right?
Learn through experience.
Yeah, learn through experience. So after 2 years, I gained enough experience that thought I was qualified to apply for the job here at Flagstaff, and lo and behold, I got it. So I think I interviewed back in December of '89, and I got the job. So that's when I started, January 1990.
So, and obviously a lot has changed since 1990 in agriculture. What were some of the programs and services that Flagstaff County offered back then?
Well, you know what? Things really haven't changed in terms of the category of programs and services, but, you know, the big one for Flagstaff at the time was weed control. So I was quickly introduced to leafy spurge. I was fortunate enough to have the past retired fieldman come and take me for a tour around the county, and we spent a lot of time in that Hardesty area looking at leafy spurge. It was Brian Lee. And Brian told me all the stories they had about how they tried to manage and fight leafy spurge throughout the years. And they did everything from, in the wintertime, they would send a cat down, clear brush in the winter so that there was adequate trails to get spray trucks through in the spring to control leafy spurge. Plus, what they did was they built a barge and floated a spray tank and sprayer on this barge and floated down the Battle River and sprayed up on the banks.
Wow. To
control leafy spurge. You wouldn't be able to do that today.
No.
But that was their ingenuity back then. And, you know, Brian told me, he says, "I've been struggling with spurge all my career, and I imagine that you'll do the same." And he was right. And then the interesting thing about the leafy spurge infestation was it's unique to that area, but that's where it started. And legend has it, it was when they were building the bridge across the Battle River. And they had to raise the grade, and it was all done with horses. So the feed for the horses came in from Ontario, and that's where the leafy spurge came from. So that's how leafy spurge ended up in that part of the country, and we're still managing it or trying to manage it. Since then, I know that there's herbicides that are a little more effective on it. We've implemented biological control, mechanical control, and you got to really get after it in a multifaceted approach. But hopefully one day everybody will figure out the best way to do it, and we'll put an end to it.
Are we making progress, or we're just kind of holding it off?
I think we're just holding it off. You know, it hasn't spread extensively outside that area, but a lot has to do with the soil conditions as well. It doesn't compete well with annual crops. It has such deep roots. It can outcompete other plants in that type of sandy soil, so that's why it does well. Yeah. And then aside from leafy spurge, throughout the years we've battled and tried to stay ahead of scentless chamomile or mayweed, and I think we've done a really good job, but it just seems to be one of those things that depends upon the year. It shows up in areas that you've never seen it before, so we're very dependent upon the public to ensure that they report it and remain vigilant, and It's always been prevalent, I guess, in our northern boundary, but we've always had really good cooperation from our landowners trying to keep it under control. And on top of that, toadflax. Throughout the years, when I first started, we did a lot of toadflax spraying, and we found that a lot of the toadflax was in the cultivated land. And in the fall, we would go out and spot spray Tordon 22K for a lot of farmers just to control it in their cultivated land. But through the years, we found that with the use of pre-harvest Roundup or glyphosate, it does a great job controlling it. So it's a persistent perennial, and it seems that if you can hammer it in the fall, it'll take care of it in cultivated land. So that's one weed that we've seen decline in that manner. But it's still around in some rangeland and ditches, so we're doing that. And so those were the big three that we dealt with back then. I remember when stork's bill came in, it was a concern, and not so much now. There's enough herbicides out there to manage it, but the two weeds of concern that we're starting to see more and more of that we have to continually deal with is white cockle and biennial wormwood. So that's what's happened with the weeds. And then of course throughout the years, pest control. So when I started, Flagstaff County was still considered a warble-free area. And I don't know if a lot of people, warbles, the warble fly, they would lay eggs, and they would burrow into the back of the cow or the beef, and they would be bumps, and that's where the eggs would be, and then when the pupate would come out, and of course, it degraded the carcass, so there was some financial considerations to consider if you had warbles. So if we identified warbles, and the inspections would take place at the auction market. So when the cattle would be dropped off, we would have to go there and basically palpate. So you run your hand down the back of the cow or the steer or the heifer, whatever was coming through there, and seeing if there's any bumps. And if there was, then we take a closer look. And if it was warbles, then we had this big yellow sticker, put it on there, warble. So when it went into the ring, the prospective buyers would know that it had warble, so they would know that it would have to be treated. But we don't do that anymore, so that kind of went by the wayside. You never hear of warbles anymore. The other big one, back in the early 90s, we had black leg of canola. So it was a disease that affected canola, and what we did was the service board said the best way to ensure that we had control within the municipality was to raise awareness. And the best way to raise awareness was to issue notices to anybody that had it. So back then it seemed like 1 in 4 canola fields had blackleg. So we issued an awful lot of notices. That information was posted at all the seed cleaning plants. And I think, our farmers were well aware of it, and they kept good rotations, and it was kind of a short-lived problem at the time. We've also dealt with grasshoppers. Annually, we always do grasshopper inspections. or surveys. We do that for the provincial government, and that gives them the ability to forecast what the potential pest threat of that will be every year. So started doing that with cameras back in '88, and we're still doing it now. So almost 35 years later, through the span of my career, I mean, we're still concerned about grasshoppers. And the only time that we had a significant infestation was during the drought of 2002. So we were able to acquire some specialized equipment. We had an eco-brand applicator that we put this eco-brand bait on. And it was just basically a barrier. So when the hoppers came, they would pick up this bait, eat it, die before it would get into a farmer's field. So yeah, that was interesting. And currently the other main ag pest that we're dealing with now is clubroot of canola. So, but there are always ag pests in that regard. Another big one that everybody's aware of is Alberta's rat-free. And out of my 32 plus years here at Flagstaff County, I think I've had maybe 4 or 5 rat calls where people have allegedly seen a Norway rat, or they've had some unidentified scat or rat poop. Mm-hmm. So we go out and check it out. We'd go check it out, and never had a confirmed case of a rat sighting here in Flagstaff County. So I think that's something to be happy about.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. Alberta is deemed or considered to be rat-free. So, and that was a program that was initiated back in the 50s, and I mean it's been very successful. So fortunate to have that. And then coyotes. We used to do a lot of control for coyote predation, and we would get a lot of calls in the spring when farmers were calving. And we don't do a lot of that anymore. I mean, we still have the tools available to us. Like we offer predicide to farmers that require it if there is predation. So that way we get out and try to get rid of the problem wildlife itself. So we had quite a few tools at our disposal there. And of course we did beaver dam removal and beaver control. And it's been pretty quiet on that front the last few years, but we haven't had the wettest years either. And the other one in regards to pest control was strychnine. And when I started in the early 90s, farmers could still purchase strychnine, and then it was shortly deregistered, and then they weren't allowed to acquire it anymore. And there wasn't a lot of viable options available to them for effective control, and eventually the federal government did allow re-registration of strychnine, but with certain conditions. And one of those conditions were that the municipality basically had to mix the concentrate in the grain for them. So we sold them the fresh product. We purchased this little cement mixer, and we would throw in the strychnine and then throw in the grain, mix it up, and then there's your treated grain. It worked well. However, if the farmer was unable to get the product out due to rain or whatnot, and he didn't have a cool enough place to store it, that liquid strychnine, the grain was sitting in it, would sprout and then rot. So there was a lot of guys that lost that product due to that. And eventually the federal government did allow registration so that they could purchase the raw product, and the sales were through the municipality. But since then, the registration has been taken away again, so I think our agricultural producers are going to be somewhat challenged in terms of being able to find an effective product again. The other thing was soil conservation. In the early 90s, Flagstaff County actually had equipment for soil conservation, tillage and demo, seeding and tillage demos. We had a hay buster drill that we haul around the country for farmers to demo and try, and then we got a Victory seed evader. So we used that, and then we also had a Noble blade. So that was done to try to ensure that, or show the benefits of conservation seeding, conservation tillage. And 30-some years later, just about every farmer in Flagstaff County practices conservation tillage, conservation seeding. Everybody's got a zero-tail drill. So, it was nice to be a part of that. The other one was Shelter Belt Establishment Program. PFRA was a wonderful federal organization that provided us with shelter belt trees. In fact, the majority of the shelter belts that you see here in Flagstaff County were all derived from that program. And fabulous program, and as well PFRA also was involved in funding a lot of our tank loader water loading stations that we have as well. So it was the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration, and that was formed back in the 30s, late 30s, to address soil conservation issues at the time and assist the farmers of Western Canada. So the majority of the shelter belts that you see, as I mentioned, are a direct result of that program. And we used to plant a pile of shelter belt trees when I first started. In fact, we would book farmers in for about 2 weeks planting straight. So I think it's important that everybody understands the value of shelter belts, and plus that they're not going to be around forever. Like the longevity of these are anywhere from 60 to 75 years old. So some of the shelter belts that we see are getting to the end of their lifespan. So that's why it's so important to look at replacing these shelter belts eventually. And Flagstaff County is, I think, the only municipality right now in the province that is offering a formal shelter belt program where we're covering half the cost of the trees. So, good on Flagstaff to, see the value of this and ensure that it continues on. So, encourage everybody to take advantage of that program.
Yeah, that's a great program. And I know in the last little while, there's been a little bit of concern about all the trees and brush that have been taken out recently.
Yeah, definitely. Loss of habitat. And even if you take some brush out, replace it where it's not going to bother you. It's still a benefit. So I think if we can get people, looking in that direction, it'll be very beneficial. But there was a reason why shelter belts were established, and hopefully people will see that.
Yeah.
And we can get more uptake on the program. And it's actually, I find it enjoyable when, I'm driving through the country and I see shelter belts that I helped plant 30 years ago. It's pretty rewarding to see the size of them now. So it's nice to look back on that. We used to do a lot of extension events back in the day. We would host a lot of ag events. We would have all the representatives from herbicide companies come out and talk about their new products that they have. And typically that was like 10, 12 different companies, and now you're down to maybe 4 or 5. So that's how things have changed over the years. We did a lot of summer tours. It was an annual event. We would look at crops, look at weed varieties. We would even do cereal demonstration variety trials as well. So we did that on a regular basis, probably for 8-10 years. But, it's interesting how a lot of that now has been taken over by private industry. So we don't do that as much anymore. And, of course, we have the Battle River Research Group that does a lot of the plots now that we used to in terms of demonstration and variety trials. So, yeah.
So as we said, much has changed since 1990 in agriculture and at Flagstaff County. What are some of the most memorable changes you've seen since then?
I don't know if I would call them memorable, but, I've seen less involvement or partnering from the federal and provincial government. A lot of the stuff that we're doing now is more on our own, whereas when we first started, we had DAs, DHEs, and those offices were closed and then went down to specialists. But, we just don't have that support anymore from Alberta Agriculture or the federal government. Private industry has, picked up the slack, and I think that's wonderful. The only problem is you're missing that independent opinion, and I thought that was always so valuable when you had that access to Alberta Agriculture for that reason. So, that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen. And then when I look at the the role of the service board in the future, one thing, the service boards remain consistent in terms of enforcement of the acts and legislation, and they advocate on behalf of our producers, and they still continue to do that. So we have a very strong agricultural industry here in Flagstaff County. I know we've talked about it before. We still have the highest number of Century Farm families within Flagstaff County, more so than any other municipality in the province. So that's one thing to be, very proud of. And, we're always up there, number 4, number 5, in terms of annual crop production within the province as well. So, and there will always be a need for the service board and their programs. So, and I'm glad that I was a part of that for about 20 years. And I guess that's why I've kind of focused more on the service board, because, my first 20 years of employment here in Flagstaff, that's what it was all about.
That covers agriculture. What about the changes at Flagstaff County?
At Flagstaff County itself, through the years, the adoption of technology, it's kind of neat to know that when I first rolled in here, you had a switchboard, you had a rotary phone. Typewriters, yeah. Gestetners. I think I vaguely recall when the first photocopy machine came in. Huh. But when you look at the advent of technology and how it's advanced so quickly, it blows me away. And 30 years or 32 and a half years, it hasn't been a long, that's not a long period of time. No. But when you think of the technological advancements, all the vehicles had two-way radios. So, you were able to have communication with each other in that regard. And the great part about it is you always had a consistent weather report across the county, because I always remember if it started raining somewhere in the county, there was always a grader operator saying, "Hey, it's raining here. What's it doing in your part of the world?" Mm-hmm. So you've gone from that technology to, the simple cell phone, where it's your camera, it's your phone, it's a recorder, it's a compass, you can access your air photos. When you look at health and safety, they do their hazard assessment forms on there. Communication is just so rapid right now. And if there's something you don't know, it's, you got Google, you can figure it out pretty quick. So it's kind of neat how that technology is advanced. All the way from 1990, it's like, I don't know if I want to take that truck because it doesn't have air conditioning, right? Yeah. And then, we have Munisite. It's a great software program that we utilize our air photos with. We use GIS, GPS to determine and record where weed infestations are, so we can keep track of our progress. So, yeah, it's the technological advancements, I think, that's been most prominent in terms of, what I've seen changed here within the organization.
Yeah, and I guess I'd like to think that, Flagstaff County residents are better informed these days due to that technology.
That's a great point. We used to do newsletters, and we still do. But there was newsletters, and I think typically, once a year, public open house. And I recall having to go as the Ag Fieldman and, providing a report. And all department heads would provide a report, and there were probably about 50, 60 people, citizens at this open house asking questions of council, and that's what it was. And we don't utilize that exact format, but when you consider what we do in terms of communication, it's phenomenal. From a newsletter, which we still do, you're doing the podcast, you're on Twitter, Facebook, what else are you on? YouTube. Yeah. There's no reason to not know what's happening.
All right. And I know you as my direct supervisor, the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer, but you've had a few other titles. What other roles have you had here with the county? Throughout my 32 plus years, I started Agricultural Fieldman, as you mentioned. I think it was 2002, so 12 years later, I assumed the role of development officer, and that was interesting. So I kept that role, I think, for about 8 years, and it was interesting.
I think it was one of the more difficult positions that I've assumed here within the county. There's a lot to know. You have this document called the Land Use Bylaw, which in essence is just a huge rule book. And I don't like to follow rules all that often, if you know what I mean. But, I mean, it's an extensive rule book full of, regulations. And, of course, there's enforcement that goes along with it. But it did give me insight as to why development is important. And prior to becoming the development officer, I was one of those people that went ahead and built things without a development permit. It's like, it's my property. Why do I need a development permit? And it wasn't until you start taking some of the courses. I took my applied land use planning certificate through the U of A. And then, it opens your eyes and say, okay, I understand why there's a permitting process in place. And not only to protect myself, protect the municipality, protect my neighbors, it's there for everyone. So once you learn the why, it made, things became a lot more clear for me. So, and the other thing too is even with subdivisions, our planning and development department, we're there to work with our citizens to ensure that, what they're doing today doesn't come back to bite them tomorrow. And I've seen that happen in terms of development. People have built too close to a property line or not even on their property line, and they're not aware of it. We're more than happy to ensure that what you do today will ensure a smooth transition if you ever want to sell, subdivide, or do something with your property tomorrow. So, yeah, the importance of planning and development. I also spent time with the peace officers. I was the supervisor of peace officers for a while, and that was really interesting. Trying to understand the requirements that are imposed upon us by the Solicitor General. So, and then working with them in terms of the enforcement and the types of fines and issues that they deal with. So that was interesting. Of course, communications. And it's been just a joy working with you, Cary, and to see how our communications department has just transformed our ability to communicate with our citizens. And it's interesting that, we're able to be the regional voice. When you look at, events and happenings that are going on throughout the region, we're ensuring that it gets out there to everyone. And I'm always amazed when you talk about the statistics of the impressions that we have on our social media and the numbers that come from that. I'm going like, wow, there are a lot of people looking at what we're putting out there. So I find that really interesting.
Yeah, we do get a pretty good reach,
yeah,
a wide reach.
Yeah, so, and that's been within, the last 6 years. So, I mean, we're doing a really good job there and we're being noticed. Economic development. I've been very fortunate to work with that department. They're doing a great job ensuring that we look after retention and expansion of our businesses. They have a strategic plan. Council works very closely with them, and council understands the importance of economic development to the region. And they're doing great things as well. I've been involved with recreation funding program. I've really enjoyed that, working with our agricultural societies. And then, of course, the other community-based programs that I've helped with as well. So, all in all, it's been really rewarding and enjoyable. And that's one thing is I definitely will miss all of my co-workers as I leave the organization.
Now, if you can gaze into the proverbial crystal ball for a moment, what are your thoughts going forward for the Flagstaff region?
Well, I think Flagstaff County is well positioned. I think we all understand that we need to take advantage of our strengths. And of course, one of those strengths is our agricultural industry. As I mentioned, we are an agricultural powerhouse within the province in terms of annual crop production. In terms of the agricultural expertise that we have locally, when you have fourth and fifth generation farms out there, and they've been there since the early 1900s, they know how to farm. So that's a strength that you just can't discount. We have economic development, and as I mentioned, they're working to strengthen our current businesses through retention and expansion. The only challenge that I see is population decline, and I know that that comes up time and again, but it seems with every census, our numbers gradually keep going down, and you can only keep doing that for so long. So I think if everybody becomes aware of it, hopefully we can turn that around. And we might not turn it around tomorrow, but hopefully by the next census, at least if we can stabilize it or see an increase in population, hopefully the initiatives that we put in place, are starting to work. So, and I think the county has well positioned itself to adapt to most future challenges. I know that council's been doing a lot of work in terms of long-range financial models. We are concerned about, loss of assessment. We definitely need to see, new assessment come in, because your current assessment, through depreciation or obsolescence, it never stays the same. So that's why you always have to continually look for, new opportunities. So I know council's taken that into consideration. We have a lot of risk assessment tools that we're starting to use, and as well, council has done a great job with its priorities. So we know that if times do get tough, they'll look at what's been prioritized, and whatever is the lowest priority, that's going to go by the wayside to ensure that we have the appropriate programs and services in place for our citizens. So yeah, I think Flagstaff County is, in good hands and is well positioned. So I think, they should look forward to the challenges and opportunities that are going to come their way in the future.
All right, Brent, we've covered quite a bit in the last half hour or so. Do you have any last words to leave us with?
I have had so much fun, and I've been so fortunate and very blessed to have been part of this organization for 32 and a half years, and not only part of the organization, but part of this community and region. So very proud of Flagstaff County. I'm very proud of the Flagstaff region. And, there was times when it's been challenging, but challenging is good. I mean, that's what makes you grow. And it's been just a wonderful learning experience, and I am truly going to miss it. I'm going to miss all the people in the organization. I'm not going anywhere. Still going to stay within the region, but yeah, I'm going to miss. I am definitely going to miss it. But at the same time, I'm so happy that I had this opportunity.
Well, thank you for this, Brent. Thanks for all the help you've given me over the last several years. I'm certainly going to miss you, but I wish you all the best as you embark on the next chapter.
Thanks, Cary, and I'll keep you apprised as to what it is.
Sounds good. You take care.
You too. Thanks so much.